everybody, Robbie here. GiveDirectly is an extraordinary organisation, working to end extreme poverty through an idea that is simple but revolutionary. Give cash directly to people in extreme poverty and let them decide what they need most. Research shows this approach is not only effective but also deeply empowering. Since I first read about GiveDirectly in 2017, it's been the focus of almost all my charitable giving. I find the research-backed practices and incredibly meaningful recipient stories so compelling that almost every time I've thought in detail about the organisation and what they do, I've increased my regular giving. In this special podcast-thon episode of the Coach's Journey podcast, Stephanie Hill, the VP People at GiveDirectly, joins me to explore the connections between teaching, coaching, and leadership, and to outline the transformational work that GiveDirectly does. From her days working to recruit and develop thousands of teachers in New York, to her role in helping rapidly scaling global non-profit build strong teams, Stephanie shares deep insights into learning, growth, and the power of trusting people to know what they need. In this episode, we dive into GiveDirectly and its work. Me as an enthusiastic supporter and donor to the charity, and Stephanie from her point of view as an employee. We get into why giving cash directly to the poorest people in the world works. Common misconceptions about cash transfers as a form of philanthropy, amazing stories from GiveDirectly's recipients, and the power of trust. Why both great coaching and effective philanthropy start from the belief that people know what they need. We spend the first 45 minutes or so diving into the organisation before we bridge into Stephanie's work. And in that part, I hope you'll find fascinating the stories from inside the position of VP People in an organisation like GiveDirectly. So on learning and coaching and culture and more, we talk about the gradual release model, how great teaching and coaching helps people build confidence and autonomy over time. We talk about lessons from scaling, what it takes to grow an organisation quickly while keeping core values intact, building a culture of learning and how GiveDirectly fosters ongoing development amongst its globally distributed team, leading with values, how GiveDirectly has taken its values and actually brought them to life. And of course, we get into loads of Stephanie's personal leadership journey, what she learned from recruiting and training 5,000 teachers a year, how those lessons and more apply to coaching, leadership, and organizational growth today. The episode's packed with wisdom for coaches and leaders and anyone passionate about learning and development and making a meaningful impact. I hope you'll really enjoy that. Of course, in the first part, you'll get lots of enthusiasm from me. But if you want the polished GiveDirectly answers that I can't give and that maybe I don't give Stephanie the chance to give, then of course you can find those on GiveDirectly's website and more. And there are loads of links for GiveDirectly in the show notes and elsewhere. I can't wait to share GiveDirectly's amazing work with you. But it's important to say, it's not just that this is an amazing charity that made me want to feature GiveDirectly on the show. It's that it's a charity and not-for-profit whose work closely aligns with the philosophy of coaching. At its heart, coaching is about trusting people, about believing they have the answers within them and supporting them to make the best choices for their own lives. GiveDirectly operates on the same principle. Rather than imposing solutions, it hands people the resources to create their own change. For coaches who want to make a difference in the world beyond their work, I can't think of a better organisation to support. If you've never quite found a focus for your charitable giving that really resonates, or if you've ever wondered how you can contribute in a way that really aligns with the values of coaching, courage, trust, empowerment, belief in human potential, then GiveDirectly could be a powerful answer. If you've got a few pounds or dollars to spare this month or every month, consider giving to GiveDirectly. They'll send it to someone for whom those few pounds or dollars will go further than you can possibly imagine as part of a story of courage, empowerment, and trust in the beauty of human nature. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoy this conversation with fantastic Stephanie Hill. Stephanie Hill, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Hi, Robbie. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's a real pleasure. We're going to get into this in lots of ways, I'm sure, in the next little while. But it's probably worth saying just a little bit about how you come to be here. Maybe first, actually, for people who haven't read it yet or that kind of thing, can you tell us what your role is currently and where you work and what that involves?
Oh, yeah. I am the VP of People at GiveDirectly. GiveDirectly is an international nonprofit that gives unconditional cash to people living in extreme poverty. So it is an incredibly cool organization that I hope we get to talk a little bit more about. But I, as the VP People, I was the first VP People that we had in the organization. I started about 5 years ago. And I do everything from focusing on the people operations. So how are we paying people? How do we do remote work? We are a remote first organization for our global team. how much do we pay them? And then to people engagement. So are people happy? Are they productive? What do they need to be happier or more productive? To learning and development, and how are they growing as professionals in the organization? How are we building successors and making sure that managers in the organization have the support that they need, both in forms of data to make good decisions, but also in terms of thought partners as they're working through difficult people management challenges.
Yeah. So we're definitely going to talk about GiveDirectly, because in a way that's why not in a way, entirely that's why we're here, right?
Yes.
So we'll definitely do that, and maybe that's the first place to go. But I guess what I want to say at the start is, so I sent a message to Olivia Chen at GiveDirectly, who's one of the people I'd had connection with this as an idea. I can't remember when it was, last year sometime, and we ended up, and I would have been happy with anybody who worked at GiveDirectly, because I really just wanted to put a spotlight on the organization for reasons we'll get to in a sec. But I was so excited that she and Yona or Tyler and Nicole, the people who have helped us get here, and thank you to all of you, that we ended up with you, because I think again, for me personally, forget listeners, who cares about them? For me, I'm fascinated to hear more about all the stuff that you just talked about. But to say a little bit about the charity, which I haven't said to you yet, and so my engagement with the charity, but also to give listeners a sense of this. As far as I can think, it's really the only charity that I've given to on a regular basis since I discovered it. And actually what happened when I discovered it, I think I may have been giving regularly, not in a big way, to another charity at the time. And actually I moved my money to GiveDirectly. And there are also reasons for that. I'm pretty sure I first heard about it. I heard about it in a couple of places at once. And the first one, I think, and any Dutch people listening, apologies in advance, was in Rutger Bregman's book. So when I say apologies in advance, my Dutch friend basically laughed me out of the room when I said, I've read this book by a Dutch guy called Rutger Bregman, and then she pronounced his name properly, and it sounds completely different if you're Dutch. But people might have come across Bregman because he went viral years ago at Davos for saying, we should be talking about tax. And he has a great, I think his TED talk is called Poor People Don't Lack Character, They Lack Cash. But the book, Utopia for Realists, which I think I read in 2017, had GiveDirectly in it. And I think straight away, having read that and read the case that he made for the direct giving of cash to people who are the poorest people in the world, and how it doesn't do all the things that humans for some reason think it would do. Which is basically like they don't all spend it on drugs, which seems to be the natural assumption that people make, which as soon as you've questioned it is insane. But it is like don't people just squander the money? So I'd heard his cases and started giving then. And what I found was, like, every time I thought about the charity, I ended up upping my giving. And then, like, what's interesting about, I can't remember, last year sometime, I think I got this email. Actually, there's probably I'm trying to think for coaches what the learning is. But I got this great email from Olivia inviting me to a donor meeting, which, amongst other things, told me, which I wouldn't have been able to add up because this is over. I first started probably giving to GiveDirectly in 2017 or 2018. And the email told me that I'd given over $11,000 directly to the poorest people in the world, which made me in the top 3% of donors. And honestly, that was like, that's quite something. And because $11,000, I don't know if that sounds like a lot of money or not a lot of money, depending on who you are. And once you've, it's like, Stephanie, don't worry, I'll let you speak in a minute. It's like, but it's such an interesting inquiry, all of this stuff, because $11,000 sounds like an extraordinary amount of money to give to charity to me on some levels, given how much money I generally have. And yet, and this is why every time I think about GiveDirectly, I end up giving a bit more money to them, because it seems like a tiny amount of money given how much money I've made over those, let's say, 8 years, given how much money I've made and how much I've therefore also spent on other things, when there are people in the world living on a couple of dollars a day. And, it's interesting, actually, preparing for this interview, we had circumstances in our family last year which actually meant that I cut all my charitable donations because we'd had too much financial uncertainty. And I, just before this interview, I found myself, I put a load of it back, because it is, again, if you pay attention to this idea, I find it really hard not to give. And that's really my hope for this conversation. And I know for you, it's similar, really, that we can as well as creating a great conversation about how people learn and change and organizational culture and all those things, that we can give some sense really of just how important a cause this is and how transformational this organization is. And this is also my way of saying to you and everyone who, anyone from GiveDirectly who might be listening, thank you, because I do just think it's amazing.
Yeah, Robbie, it's really interesting. You talk about how the actual number, how much 11,000 means, how much it means to you, how much it means. Money is all, I think a lot of it is so relative to so many people, and personal circumstances, of course, drive so much of what seems like a lot of money or a little bit of money. But when you do think about our recipients and the recipients that we work with, and what it means to live on a couple of dollars a day, and how life-changing something like a few $100s can be. I used to live in New York City, and you would walk out the door and accidentally spend, obscene amounts of money just going about your day-to-day life. You stop at the grocery store and you stop for a coffee and you get on the subway and God forbid you take a taxi. And when you see some of the recipient stories of what they will do with the money, and how they will put roofs on their homes, how they will purchase mattresses and have a good night's sleep for the first time, how they will send their kids back to school because they had to pull their kids out because they couldn't afford the school fees at a certain point, how they will buy assets that will allow them to start businesses and they'll become entrepreneurs and then have sustaining money that will keep them and their children eating and going to school and making renovations on their home for the long term. And you just think about how creative and how they know what they need. I think that's the thing that when I think about the beauty about giving unconditional cash is that recipients know what they need. And it's only hubris that makes us think that we know better than they do what they need, or that we spend our money better than they would spend the money. And I don't know. Every time we have an amazing comms team. You mentioned a few of their names, and they do these really compelling videos sometimes that we watch in our town halls, just so that people who don't have a chance to be face-to-face with our recipients on a daily basis get a chance to feel more connected to the communities that are being impacted by our work. And every single time I just find myself almost in tears with just the awe of how cool the work is I get to do. And how cool this job is. It just, and it's all about being able to see those recipients and see the things that they're able to do. But yeah, all that to say, I am so glad and grateful for your support to GiveDirectly over the years, and also for this opportunity to tell more people about the organization. So thanks again.
Yeah, and I'm going to just take a couple of those things as well, because there's so much in here. I don't know which one to start with, but the first one, you say that these videos that they make, bring you almost to tears. I'm really lucky, because I've been on a couple of those donor calls over the years. The one that Olivia invited me to last year was amazing though, because we got to Zoom live with people recipients live who were telling about their experience and what they'd done with the money. And of course, it's not exactly my money that was there, but it basically is, and it is. And there's this great thing, which I remember being new, I think. This is probably, price or age, when I was maybe first in a room with people from GiveDirectly. Some of the team was in London, and I met up when I lived there. London, another city, of course, where you can, you stumble out the door and accidentally spend £100 or whatever. But there's this amazing thing at live. I will put links to this and all the things we talk about in the show notes for listeners. But at live.givedirectly.org, there's this amazing list of basically recipients having the option, I think, when they receive their transfer, their cash transfer, to write something about it. And I actually I've been on it a few times, but this was the first time I went to it. And for some reason today, it just deeply touched me. It's like all those reasons you said, it in writing, just hearing about the difference that it makes. And it is deeply touching. And look, one of the reasons that I wanted to reach out to GiveDirectly to see if somebody would be up for coming on the show was because I just wanted to do another thing, especially I think as I knew I'd cut my donations and needed to wait for a bit more stability in our life before we could put some of those back. Like, what else can I do right now? But also because I think there's something about what is it, like, I don't know if we'd call it the values or the principles behind this exact kind of charitable work that aligns really closely with the principles behind coaching. And so for people who listen to this show, it may particularly resonate with them because it is this thing about they know what they need. And in fact, by giving cash, we're really saying to those people, I believe in you. Like, I believe in your ability to know what's best for you and to change your life. And we were talking a little bit before we switched on about, those, sometimes we get really wrapped up in the differences between coaching and training and mentoring and those kinds of things. But, one of the principles of all those things, I think, when done well, but particularly of what the SpeechMark's rules of coaching do, is they force us to really have faith in the other person, to really give that other person the trust and the faith. Like, I believe you can sort out your problems. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that I need to tell you exactly how to do it. Mm-hmm. I believe, and good managers do this, good teachers do this. I believe that you will find the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. And I remember that really is what you see. I mean, I remember people, it might have been in Bregman's book, it might have been elsewhere when I started looking into this or hearing about it in other places. We do have this kind of, like you say, the hubris to think that we know from afar what to do, like how to help somebody on the other side of the world who lives a life, if somebody's living on $2 a day, that's just an impossibly different life to the life of actually pretty much everybody who lives in the UK or the US or Europe. And the idea that we would know, is pretty akin to the idea that my advice will be perfect for anybody I meet off the street, let alone a person on the other side of the world. And I remember like an early story I heard was like when some of the first I think this is true. You can fact check this if you know it, or everyone can accept that my memory is any human's memory, completely flawed. My memory is that, like, in the early GiveDirectly trials, I heard somebody tell a story about this once. They were finding out what people spent the cash on, and they were really confused about why so many people were buying corrugated iron. And it turned out two reasons. Like, one is a roof, like you were saying, but also that it basically doesn't depreciate in value. It can't be destroyed. It doesn't fall down, and it means that you've got an asset then. So if you then need to use that asset to sell later on or something, you've still got it. And it's just like, the reflection at the time was that nobody in an Oxfam office with all the greatest respect to all the amazing work Oxfam's done, but nobody in an Oxfam or a GiveDirectly office or my office, halfway around the world would have known that without incredible amounts of research. But as soon as you give it to that person, they know the thing they've been waiting to spend money on for a long time. And like you say, sometimes it's that really meaningful. I mean, just see if I can find it. Actually, I think I kept it up. It's a beautiful one that I just read. They're all great. Where's the one that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find it. I was on here earlier and I scrolled too far because there were too many good ones. This beautiful one I was reading earlier on live.givedirectly.com about, the livestock that a particular woman has, and how, again, similarly, they can provide when we need them, but then the next woman on the list is fixing the fishing net, and the next person is doing something different, and the next person is doing something different. And rather than dropping off a whole pile of fishing nets in a village, or whatever we might have done when we understood this stuff less, we can really have faith in the people that they know what they can do best to help their situation. And I think I definitely think there is a kind of coaching philosophy to that, or they share the same philosophy, something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think it's really tempting when you see, wow, a lot of people are purchasing the roofs, or they're purchasing livestock to go, the next thing you might think is, oh, well, great, let's just give everybody a roof and give everybody some livestock. And there are some charities that do that, will sort of come in with a solution. And I think one of the things that we really believe in is we believe in the recipient choice, but we also believe in efficiency. And it is very rarely efficient for a foreign organization to purchase all of those materials and ship them and store them in a warehouse and deliver them and usually what folks will find at the end of that is that a smaller fraction of the donation actually gets converted into goods and services that get into the hands of the people who need it. And I think one of the things that makes cash unique and amazing is that not only are we not trying to force a solution, which to bring it back to coaching, it would be like, wow, one time I told somebody I gave somebody this really great advice and it changed their career path or changed their life. And now I'm going to give that same advice to everybody I meet. We don't do that with our friends, and we don't try to give all of our friends the same thing. And so why would we think that we would know that everybody needs the same thing if we don't even know what the circumstances are they're living in? Maybe they already have a roof. Maybe what they really need is school fees to send their kids back to school. It's both the efficiency. It's really deeply one of our very first value, and we're a very values-driven organization, is recipient first. And that means really keeping that cash unconditional and giving people the choice, making sure that they have the choice to spend on what they think they need.
Yeah, and I mean, my memory of numbers, we were joking about that earlier as well. My memory of numbers at GiveDirectly, I don't know if you have the latest one, is that, and I remember this really struck me at the time as well, is that 90% or something of the money, or 90+% of the money that I give ends up in the hands of one of the poorest people in the world. I mean, not in their hands, because of course you're doing it in the most efficient way possible, so it's mostly through like mobile banking and what have you, but it ends up in the possession of all those people, and that somehow really appealed to me.
I'm really bad with numbers, but I will say it depends program by program. There's some places where there's a little less stability in the region, and that can affect or impact those exact numbers. But yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot more than you would think.
Yeah, one of the other things I've just remembered is it might even be that it was over Christmas or before Christmas or something like that. I was talking to my mum, and I must have told her before about GiveDirectly. I definitely have. She was aware of it. It might have been because we knew we were going to do this. I can't remember if we had it in yet, but she did the thing, bless her, that people do all the time, and I can't remember exactly what she said, but she had the gut response to giving money directly to people, which almost all of us have, right? Mm-hmm. I can't remember exactly her one, but I made the joke about the drugs one earlier on, but it's like, won't they just squander it, essentially? And I can't remember who it was that I heard say this, so I gave her this. I want to pop it into this conversation now, just in case, for those of us listening who are naturally having that response of like, this can't be right, it can't work, because if it worked, like, why do we not do that with everybody in every country, to some extent, or like, it can't work, all those arguments against that stuff. And the thing that I heard straight away was, okay, apparently, I don't know what the proportions are, lots and lots of people have that response, but they all think that they wouldn't squander the money. So we all think, we wouldn't squander the money, but that other people would. And it's like, as soon as you do that I like it because it's a little pattern breaker. It's like, well, would you squander? If we were to give you £1,000 now, which might be the UK equivalent of 100, I mean, it'd be less than the UK equivalent of $100 in, wherever in Africa it might be. Would you squander that money, or would you spend it on something meaningful that would help you be happier and your life be more sustainable, and all these things might help the education of your kids, might help your relationships, and everyone, of course, thinks that they wouldn't do that. So it's a reminder: if you're having that sort of natural reaction in a country like the UK or the US, which most people seem to have, it's just that reminder: if you were to be given unconditional cash as a one-off or over a period of time, what would you do with it? And pretty much everyone has the same, that I've talked about it or read about it, has the same responses that are up in that, essentially in that list of testimonials on the live.givedirectly.org, which is I'd spend it on learning, I'd invest it in something, I'd fix something about my house. Like, I think it was the thing that was really touching my heart. I'd never seen this one before, but you mentioned it as well in the ones that I was reading today, is about getting better sleep. Actually,
Yes.
this year I've bought a mattress instead of, a modern mattress. And then I'm going to save $10 a month of my Give Directly money to buy a bed in a year's time. And I sleep better. And therefore, and we all know what sleep does to us, right? When we sleep worse, we're worse with our partners, we're worse with our friends, we're worse with our work, we're worse with our children, and so it's like, it's very meaningful for that kind of thing.
There was a recipient one time that I heard say something to the effect of, you can always tell when Give Directly has been in a village because the people, they walk differently. They stand up straighter. There was something, I don't remember exactly what her words were, but she said they walk differently because they've been sleeping on mattresses. And so their bodies are just, are moving in a different way. It was amazing. There's a lot of that. And also, we found, a lot of other charities and a lot of, when folks are thinking about how to give, they think about the impact they want to have. So people think about the issues that they care most about. So you might think about, my background is in teaching and education. I care about education. I think education gives people a lot more opportunity and options in their life. And I think having options is always really important. And so, you could go to a place that is building schools or sending teachers or, buying books or tablets for kids, because you think that that's going to directly impact education. But what we find is that cash actually impacts educational outcomes as much, if not more, because kids are not just going to school, but going to school fed. And you can't learn if you're hungry. I know that from working in schools. Kids that are hungry are not focused. And so when you think about that, you think about, domestic violence, also something that I care deeply about. Actually, a lot of what we found is having cash actually helps with domestic violence. So the research, and I think this is another really cool thing about Give Directly. One of the things I really, really love is that we take research really seriously. So, you can take our word for it. We can say, it's easy for me to say, oh, wow, recipients don't squander the money. You can try to apply some logic to it, but you also don't have to. You can just go online and read the research, and there's so much of it. Actually, if you go to our website, there's a whole very fancy Airtable where you can look up all the different research. You can look at it by topic, and you can see some of the results that we've seen over more than 10 years of doing this work. That it's not just, you'll see that it has outcomes on those issues, but it also has lasting outcomes. So a lot of things other people might think is that, wow, you give, I think there's that old trope of like, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. And if you teach a man to fish, but what we've also seen that myth busted many times by the research.
Yeah. And it could be like, I don't know, but it could be that at a certain point, that's true. But actually for people who are in these kinds of, and most of us can probably recognize this from our own lives, whatever country we've grown up in. Well, not most of us, but those of us who have had times where we were really short of money, we know that, yeah, that might be true at some point. But actually right now, if I had this bit of extra money, I would do this thing that would make me much better equipped to deal with life in the long term. And I think that was definitely one of the things that really struck me about first learning and reading about Give Directly, was that the things that people were doing, they even just my intuitive response to them, they all looked like long-term moves. It's like we say, education, sleep, investments in business, somebody saving up to buy like a moped, to start a moped taxi or courier thing between villages. It's like all these things that I could just never predict, but all like, and because Give Directly, especially back in the day, didn't have a big comms team. There wasn't there wasn't filtering going on, right? Which is sometimes what you wonder. It was just like, and that's again what I love about that live feed. It's just like, these are all the things that are happening. So I loved that. I wanted to catch a couple of other things. So one is that Yeah, it's so interesting. Actually, let me do the research one first, and then I'll come to that. So the research one, I was just reading a research one that I read recently, which is not a concern I had, because it's kind of, I'm interested in economics, but it's a little too economicsy for me. But I was reading one, I don't think it's that new anymore, as last year sometime, about as GiveDirectly goes on longer, and then the research becomes wider, because some of those core things, there's a whole set of research on them now. This was one about if you give cash to, you're never giving cash to everybody in a country, every poor person in a country. So if you give it only to some people, does it, for example,
we'd like to
make everything right? Does it make does it drive prices up? Does it cause inflation?
Right.
And in fact, it's interesting. People can read it. I'll put a link in the show notes to the thing I was reading today. But in fact, it just shows that, again, a bit like the being slack in our lives, the lives of the people receiving the money. There's plenty of time before I can get if I'm a poor person in this particular part of Africa, wherever it might be, there's plenty of money I can get before it starts being slack, right? Mm-hmm. I can pay for my children's school fees first, and then next I'll invest in the business, and then next I'll do this. And then in a while, it will just be about having slightly nicer things. It won't be about necessities. But the same is true in the economy. So it's basically this, the argument it was making there is, what happens is this cash just gets passed around the economy to other people. And that's a kind of economic point, which I'm, quite interested in. But the crucial thing in that research was there's enough slack in the economy that actually, the person in the corner shop doesn't have to hire an extra person, which pushes the price of everything in the shop up, because they've got enough space. There's just extra cash. It just flows around. So I think that's super interesting. And then, sorry, do you want to jump in on that?
No, I just wanted to say, we've actually seen that in communities adjacent to the communities that have received cash, the economy has improved there. Yeah. I mean, I'm not an economist, obviously, but yeah, I've also heard that that concern that about the inflation and about the impact on neighboring communities, and I think moving with intention as we do our work, keeping this recipient first mentality of we want to make sure that we're learning as we go, and also making intentional decisions from the beginning that will do no harm has led us to find out a lot about what happens in the economy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought in the research because I do think, again, that for I don't know, people, especially people like me, I don't know what I mean by that, but it's like this kind of, probably like you, this kind of generation, it's like it does ground us a lot more. We do look for that stuff, and certainly GiveDirectly's, I've always found the research very compelling. The other piece I wanted to pick up on is, I think I learned about this in Utopia for Realists ages ago as well. It just reminds me, you were talking about how people stand differently and domestic violence and all these things that you wouldn't expect to change. And there's this study, for all I know, it's been debunked by now, but it doesn't feel like that from my personal experience. It has a truth feel to it. And I think it's to do with Indian sugar farmers. And they basically had this experiment, and these people get, they make almost all their money at the point of the harvest. So they have a point in the year where they have, in terms of what's available to them, what do we call it? Abundance of resource. And then just before the harvest is a point in their year where they have real scarcity of resource. And one of the interesting findings from working with these people at different times was that people scored worse on numerical and verbal reasoning, as I remember it, when their resource is really scarce. Wow. So that goes back to, I'm hungry, the scarcity and stress of knowing that things don't add up, don't work in our life. And it's true for all of us, right? This is my takeaway from it. We need to be really aware that when we're in a feeling or a literal place of scarcity, perhaps particularly financial scarcity, we've got to be careful of it, because we may be literally thinking things through worse. And again, we just get that sense of, you take that weight off people's shoulders, then the tension in the home is different, and people can learn better and all these things. So I think it's it does. Go on.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to add on something there, I'm really aware in this moment that philosophically, part of the reason you're here is that philosophically for me, GiveDirectly's work really adds up with who I am. And I'm sure it won't be exactly true for everybody, but I'm also really aware that less now, because, as I understand it, US aid, perhaps the development office in the UK are contributors to GiveDirectly or to direct cash transfer programs in a different way. So people are on board. But I do think that there's still, people haven't seen this model. And so again, I really hope that there's some people listening who are like, wow, this does sound amazing. And of course, check it out before you set up the donation. But the reason that my $11,000, right, it didn't come in a one-off $11,000 donation, right? It was almost all, there were some one-off times when I did that, but it was almost all from £10 a month, which is like $12 a month, $15 a month donations over a long period of time. And the reason that happened is every time I had this thought, it's like with some charities, with some kind of aid work, with some causes, it always feels like £10 a month doesn't go very far. But with this organization, you know exactly how far it goes because you know how many days of, earnings you will double for somebody in one of the poorest parts of the world by giving £10. And it's something like, 6 days of their life they'll have twice as much resource. So I guess that was the piece that I wanted to put in. Is the piece that you were going to put in still relevant? You still want to put it in?
No, I was just thinking about, I don't know if it's still talked about a lot, but when I was working in education, we talked a lot about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the foundation of it really being food insecurity. And you can't get to the top of that hierarchy where you really are critically thinking and using the sort of higher order thinking skills, unless you feel both primarily physically in a stable place. Usually, it's also important when you're thinking about working with professionals too. People need to feel safe. They need to feel like their basic needs are taken care of. That was a somewhat random tangent.
No, I think it connects really well. And I don't know. I don't think Maslow's gone out of fashion yet. And that it's just such a powerful model because we can all feel, we all look at that list and feel it straight away. Those pieces at the bottom, they're vital for all of us, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I was thinking about it this week. Remembering this years ago, and I don't have any attribution for this, so it may not be true, but it has the feel of truth to me. I heard somebody say, and he was again, source I trust, interested in research, very likely to be telling the truth. He said that the number is something like 2/3 of people in the USA are dehydrated at any one time.
Interesting.
And the reason he was thinking about that is essentially some version of the same thing we're talking about, which is that when we're dehydrated, for example, we make worse decisions. We're less likely to be centered and skillful. Mm-hmm. And, I was just thinking, all those things we can do to take care of ourselves enable us to be more skillful, more wise, and less reactive, more responsive, something like that. And one of those things is, like, do we know that we're going to be okay this month? And do we know that the people we care about are going to be okay? And of course, money is only part of that, and there's lots of ways to think about it. But in extreme poverty, which is the aim of GiveDirectly, right? Is there are other things that are done, disaster relief work, that kind of thing. But that's where I certainly came to it, that extreme poverty place. Really, actually, at that point, if we can double the amount of money somebody has in a year, it's just a good thing. And just to tie it in, again, not a scientist, everyone should check this before they change their whole life based around things that Robbie says on the coach's journey. But I've heard people make sustainability arguments about poverty that again, think about Maslow. Once we get, when do people start worrying and being interested in how much of a mess their neighborhood is, how much litter there is, how much they, affect the quality of air? Well, they start worrying about it once the absolutely fundamental lives of themselves and their families is sorted. 100%. So in fact, I at that point, it was interesting for me. It allowed me to, again, one of the reasons GiveDirectly has been the prime cause is, for me, I think a lot about complexity and try and use, again, not a complexity scientist or a systems theorist or anything like that, but try and use those ideas, it looks to me like solving the problem of extreme poverty is a high leverage thing to do for almost everything that we see going on in the world, including the environment.
I think so. We've also, thought about folks who are impacted most by extreme weather events. And, maybe their homes are located in a place where it looks like those extreme weather events are going to be happening more and more. They have a few choices. They can find a new home. They can reinforce their home. But you need cash to be able to do those things. And so for sure, there are some things that we can do to both, I think, if you have to choose between selling your land to a developer who's going to cut down all the trees, or not, and cash can help you make that decision. I want to be clear, the cash that we give is unconditional. So we don't want to say that you have to, but we want to make sure you have that option. And those are some things that we can help with sustainability as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. And it was like, again, in the list of testimonials that I was reading today, I hadn't seen this as clearly, I don't think. There was a set of people, and again, it's very, I found it, I don't always, but I found it touched me again today. It's like, I think partly because you get a sense of what life is like in these other parts of the world. And I've been to kind of, I don't know what you'd call developing countries a couple of times in my life, but not very often. And when I did that, it did change how I saw life and the world quite a lot. But you get this sense from this feed. And one of them was a mud wall. One mud wall, I think, was what she'd spent her money on. And again, I don't know that this would stand up to extreme weather in the kind we're talking about, but what did she have before? And it's going to be better than that, right? Is kind of the feeling. So again, we don't know, but if we think about those things, it brings me back to that idea of we don't know, right? So we can think that the best thing for the community from where we sit is to look to extreme weather, which is, we might think, is likely to happen in the next, increase in the next decade or two. But we don't know that for each person is the right thing for them to do, because they may have a really pressing medical thing. They may have a child that needs something. They may think that actually the best way for their child to not be living in a place where extreme weather happens is to be working in a certain way or learning a certain thing. So it is just again, going back to that idea of the complexity of the challenges that the world faces, but also that people in these poor places face. For me, it does feel like it's an incredible enabler to just say to somebody, and when you came back to it, and I'm really glad you did, that it is unconditional. What an incredible act of faith in human nature, just that is, which I love. It's just like, we trust you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, beautiful. We might come back to bits about the charity. Charity because I'm in the UK, non-profit because if you're in the US and you're listening, we might come back to it at different points. And of course, we'll put links to donation pages in the UK and the US. And there will be other ways to donate if you're in other countries, I'm sure. And the website and the GiveDirectly Live. But is there anything about the charities, what it delivers that you want to get into, or that's still in your mind before we maybe gear shift to a bit more about your story and the work you do now?
No, I think it's okay. Let's shift.
Hi, everybody. Just a quick thing before we get back to the show. As part of our commitment to keeping episodes like this free so we can support you and coaches like you, we'd like to ask something of you. Wherever you're listening to this show, please click subscribe or follow for The Coach's Journey. That's a free way of supporting the show and helping us continue to support you and other coaches. Thanks in advance for subscribing or following, and if you want to hear about other ways to support The Coach's Journey, then listen all the way to the end of this episode or visit www.thecoachesjourney.com. Like I said at the start, or we said at the start, a really nice thing is that we get to do this on two levels. So we get to think, for the listeners about this organization and what it does and why they might be interested in that, which we've kind of just done. And then we get to have a little insight into the insides of an organization. And of course, actually, listeners, depending on what I said in the intro, which I haven't recorded yet, they may or may not know, but it's in your bio, and I've seen it somewhere else as well, like something like 75% headcount growth in a year, right? Was that right? Like this is a kind of the scale of growth that's going on for this organization. So an organization with very interesting aims in a period of amazing growth, at a time when the world really needs this work. And you are tasked with being the VP of people, right? Like, what a like, lucky you in some ways.
Cool
right?
job, right?
Yeah.
So lucky.
Exactly. So for because I think it is relevant for conversations about coaching, about the work you do. This is a horrible question in some ways that I hate when I get it, but like, have a go at like that first part of your career, which involves teaching, and then again, some big numbers of teachers recruited, that kind of thing. Give people a sense of where you were before you arrived at GiveDirectly. And maybe if it comes up, if you remember when you first came across the idea of coaching, which I obviously know you're aware of, but it's not central to what you personally do, but give us a sense of that maybe as well.
Yep. Well, I started working as an educator right out of university, and started out as a teacher. And I was working through a nonprofit in the United States called Teach for America. I think there's a version of it in the UK as well.
I think it might be. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly, but there's one. It might be Teach First is a UK similar thing.
That's right. They recruited me out when I finished my sort of core obligations to be what they were calling a leadership development something. I don't remember, manager or something. I don't know. But I was what they called it was coaching. What I was doing. I had a cohort of about 50, 60 teachers that I would go and observe, and I think. I know that there are lots of definitions of what is coaching and what is training and what is mentoring, but what I was doing with folks is a lot of times the people who joined Teach for America were what we'd say at the time were high performers, and I am a big fan of Carol Dweck and growth mindset, but a lot of times these folks had never heard of that, so they thought that you were either a high performer or you were not. And they had gone to university and they were, straight A's and captain of this and, president of that. And then they were in front of a group of students who could not care less about all the things that they were great at, and just needed them to be a really great teacher. And the challenges that they would face often would really give them a crisis of identity. Am I or am I not a high performer? I don't seem to be good at this teaching thing. And so the form of work that I did with those new teachers was really twofold. One was, let's look at your data. Let's look at the inputs that you're putting in. So I can look at your test scores or your the observation that I made of your lesson, of how your students responded to it, of what they seem to be able to prove that they learned as a result of your teaching. And then we can diagnose what you could have done better and a little bit more training. So let's actually get crisper when you're giving directions. Let's actually, learn how to explore a concept in a different way. But it was also kind of, psycho-emotional support, helping somebody navigate an identity crisis when they realized actually it's not that I'm just always successful. It's that I'm on a growth path and I am learning and I will encounter challenges and bigger challenges than I expected, and how I respond to those challenges and who I become on the other side of that is really important to who I'm going to be as a human moving forward. And so I found that work really fun. It was exhausting though, but really, really fun. And then what I realized was I started the Teaching Collaborative, which was an alternative basically to Teach for America, but just focused on New York City schools. was that folks needed more time and a more sort of gradual release of responsibilities to get really good at teaching. And so what we started to do was teach teachers how to do the coaching while they were opening up and hosting these new teachers in their classroom. So it was almost like creating a crash course for teachers on how to coach and develop the next generation of teachers while they were sharing their classroom and allowing them to practice with their students. It's not your definition of coaching, but it was my sort of entry into helping people get better at what they wanted to do and understand how their interpretation of events is either enabling or inhibiting them from getting better. And then I joined GiveDirectly.
Yeah, and like, we haven't talked that much on actually, it makes me think we haven't talked that much on this show over the years about definitions of coaching. How fascinating that we haven't done that. But anyone who's ever watched me coach will know I hold the definitions of coaching pretty lightly. And, it sounds like those principles were here, and of course they are. You've been a teacher, and again, I don't know about Teach for America. I know a little bit from your bio, and but I know more about Teach First in the UK, and I've had clients and kind of friends who have been on that program. And it is, if you're going to last a little on a program like that, which, like, again, to speak for it, I think this is the same with Teach for America, but correct me if I'm not, in the UK, what it does is it takes, like you say, often high-performing graduates, and it puts them into, at least in the case of, for example, clients and friends I've had, some of the toughest schools to teach in the UK. And so you've really got to learn about engaging people and about, like you say, all those things that you were helping people with. So undoubtedly that, like, learning has been a part of what you've been doing. Do you remember, Stephanie, I was really interested in that idea of what did you say? Like the gradual
release.
Release. Yeah. Because again, we get that kind of, I think we can think about that. That's like a really important principle of learning in whatever way people are learning. I'm just kind of seeing that. And if you think about some of the coaching engagements that listeners or I do, if you think about training programs, like some of the flaws in them, for example, is that there is not a gradual release, right? There's a kind of sense that you're done and then you're out. And one of the reasons, for example, in coaching that I like working with people over a longer period, I think it's changed as my capabilities have changed. But early on, what I noticed was there wasn't a gradual enough release. If I had an engagement, for example, if I worked with someone for 3 months, then actually there wasn't enough time for the learning and then the gradual release. And so to create slightly more space in those engagements had more sustainability of the impact, whatever that was people were looking for. So I guess I'm curious, what you saw and learned as you created that program. And also, were there what was it? Do you remember what the kind of themes were as you created the crash course? Because again, I suspect, you're putting smart people, they're having the identity crisis. They're also having a difficult time because some of these schools would be like nothing like the schools they'd experienced. But what were the things that really helped them? Sorry, this is like a fantastic mess of question and reflection. So do with that what you will.
No, I think the concept of gradual release, it's also something I work with managers now, even at GiveDirectly, when we're thinking about how they support people who are learning how to do their job. And we think about onboarding, we think about coaching somebody up to the next level. But in the program, I think one of the things I learned was, you're kind of taking, in teaching, a lot of times when you're crafting a lesson for students, you would use, there's a rhythm of a lesson where you would model first. So I'm going to model how to do something. I'm going to model my thinking. So this is how I would solve this problem. This is how I'm going to give you a problem, or I'm going to do a problem in front of you. I'm going to show you. And it really takes for the teacher, a lot of times, if you're really, really good at something, a lot of times you don't always examine why you're good at it. And so sometimes actually we would talk about how coaches and teachers, coaches in the sort of sports sense, and teachers are often not even the people for whom everything came naturally, the people who just, were the math whizzes, or, always, were just athletically gifted. They're the people who had to actually work their way through the problem and figure out how to do it. Because the first thing we would teach the teachers to do is sort of, don't remember the word that we used for it, but basically articulate their thought process. So they would write it down, and then they would talk it through with their teacher. And it's the same thing they would do with students, when they're solving, like, here's how I would solve this math problem, but now they're doing it with their own practice. So, when I sit down to plan a lesson, I consider this, and I consider that, and I look at these resources. And it's the same thing that we ask managers to do. If you really want to grow someone, you've got to sort of do that modeling for it. Mentorship is also very much like this. And then the next stage, you would sort of say, okay, let's do this one together. So we're going to talk it through together. I'm going to ask you some questions. What would you do here? You'll give me your opinion. We're going to brainstorm together a little bit. And then practically in the classroom, you would share the classroom. You would say, I'm going to toss it over to Robbie, and Robbie's going to give you his take on this. And, student would ask a question, and you would let Robbie answer some of it. And then eventually you would do the sort of, you do it. Now I'm going to watch you, and I'll step in and help if you need me, but I'm going to let you do it. And you're going to fail some. And maybe in that first few times we work out where I'm going to give you some cues live to show you that you're messing something up. So maybe I'll be there and I'm giving you the cues. And then next time I do it, I'm not going to give you any cues, but we're going to debrief immediately after. And I'm going to give you some feedback. I'm going to say, that time that you did this, that didn't quite land. That didn't work. How did you know that was working? This was good. Lean into that next time. And maybe we practice a little bit, and then you've got to do it again by yourself immediately after, as quick as you can. You got to have another, we would call them at-bats. So the more at-bats.
Why at-bats?
It's a baseball reference. So
that's why I don't understand.
The more at-bats you have, the more you're going to get good at something, but you're not going to get good at something just by repeating, because you need somebody to show you that actually I did ballet a long time ago. And what they would do is cut the music and stop as soon as you messed up. You did something wrong. You cut the music, stop. Okay, wait, stop right there. Go back and redo it. Stop right there. Go back and redo it. Now redo it 3 times, because you don't want to build a muscle memory of doing it the wrong way. Once that muscle memory is there, it's really hard to undo. And so the more you can have quick feedback loops, and more opportunities to practice, the faster you'll be able to release into that ownership. And what I saw also is that when things are really complex, when you're doing, there are multiple variables that you're trying to incorporate at once. So there's the planning component, there's the execution component, there's the sort of presentation component of teaching or project management or anything, is that it's not a linear path. It's not, a lot of times you can gradually release various components of it, of whatever it is that you're trying to learn. And sometimes you might go too far, and you might actually take a step or two back, have a few setbacks. But usually that's where the more profound learning comes, because superficially we can get quite good at something. But then when we're solving a more difficult problem. I see this also with project management, with folks on the GiveDirectly team sometimes, is that folks will get really good at doing less complex problems, or project management, and then they'll get into something more complex and they'll falter, and then they'll start to have, again, in teaching we would call it the zone of proximal development. So you need to be in your zone of proximal development, and once you get outside of that, you're going to struggle a little bit more. And if you can recognize where that frustration point is and stay safely there, but not get to, repeat the same level of complexity over and over again, you're really going to accelerate your learning.
Yeah. Wow. So much in there. I feel like we could jump off in a million directions. The 2 things that come to my mind, one is just what a high pressure situation teaching is. It's like hard to kind of I've never done it. You have, right? So, but the idea of but I have gone into rooms with a group of people I've never met before, But the idea of doing that when I was 22 and they're like, they're a bunch of super disengaged, kids in a like school in the deepest, darkest London, it's like, I don't know how I could have coped with that. It's a really high pressure. But even I had a client recently who teaches in a university as part of his job. And one of the things we were trying to do is like, can this be essentially less like hell? And it was really interesting that one of the things that unlocked it was to have somebody else in the room. So I was just really interested in that as an idea because it felt like it just suddenly the idea of that it's an exam with like that I have to deliver it perfectly, that it can't be collaborative, that it can't be. It's very interesting to play with that stuff. And the other thing I was really noticing from what you were saying, one of many other things, was how it sounds like, like you say, it's not linear, but it was really focused practice, really, and guided practice. And one of the things that I imagined that was happening is that the new teacher was getting help with what to pay attention to, really. Because when you drop it, like you say, it's so complex. When you drop into a classroom, no matter how much training you've had, it's much more complex than that. And like, where do you start? And that's one of the things that in coaching as well. So for listeners, for me to make this real, like, actually, you may probably don't know this, and I didn't know until quite recently, but a lot of, there's the GROW model is a kind of famous model in coaching and really useful one. And in some ways, it's based on using a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, which was written by a guy who was really interested in tennis. And I think he'd been involved in kind of early meditation in the US, maybe. And really one of the things he says is, a lot of learning happens naturally if you just pay attention to the right thing. So you can, as a coach, one of the things you can do if someone wants to learn is you can just ask them what they're going to choose to pay attention to if they want to learn to teach better or present better or whatever, and then help them pay attention to it. And then usually what happens is that thing they improve at. It's weird and magical. And as a coach, you feel like you're cheating because it's like you've had a client who wanted to get better at presentations and all you did was decide to focus on how many he said or, whether she could get a bit of joke or more of her into the presentation. And suddenly everything's going really well and you feel like you haven't really done anything. And sometimes that's possible. Like if you're working with someone at the right stage of their career. But as someone dropped into an environment like teaching, like what an amazing piece of help to have somebody say, I think you should pay attention to your thought process a little bit more when you're doing this. Or I think you should pay attention to this part of it now.
Right.
And just how often we, especially probably when you get, out of the zone of proximal development into the kind of, it's too much of a stretch, how hard it is to do that at that stage and how useful it is to have a manager or another teacher or a coach or whoever it is, a friend around to say, okay, cool down. Just, you can't do this all at once. There's going to be some forward and some backwards. But what are you going to pay attention to next time?
Yeah.
And then how do you practice that thing again? Like you say, as quickly as possible. Reps, is the kind of metaphor that I can hold a bit more than at bats, although I'm going to remember that. One day I'll learn about baseball.
It's okay. You're not missing a terrible amount, but no, I think now there's so much technology now. I mean, I can imagine the folks who are doing the job that I used to do, coaching teachers, have just a world of difference. And I mean, you can use that same technology with professionals too. Now we're doing so many meetings on Zoom, for example, and presentations that are recorded. It's so easy. And I think one of the things that is really helpful is, I could observe you do something and give you the feedback. It's even better if we have a single source of truth that we're looking at, because I'm always laying judgment on when I'm observing. That didn't sound right to me. But when you've got video proof, what you're trying to look at is that didn't land right with your audience. And you can tell because you lost that person. That's what we would do with teachers. We would say, you asked a question and 3 hands went up out of 30. The next time you asked the question, you had this, you rephrased it and you had, phrased it this way. Or, even as much as, you walk a loop around the room and you happen to always walk a loop around to the same kid. And what message is that, we would look at things like the gender balance of who's raising their hands and who's not, and who are you calling on and who's not. But when you have video proof of that and you're just looking at the data, you're looking at the facts and you're saying, I'm just putting it in front of you. And then we can have a different kind of sort of coaching conversation where it's not just me giving you feedback. It's us talking about, well, given this data, what do you think is the root cause that's causing you to do this? Now, I have some theories, but I want to hear your reflections first. And then, once you discover that root cause, and usually it's like a mindset or a skill that they're missing, or a knowledge gap that they have that's causing whatever it is, then you can dig in, okay, the solution for a skill gap is very different than a solution for a mindset gap. And a lot of times I think when we're coaching, at least I use the term lightly, coaching new team members, we assume a mindset gap. We assume you don't want to do it this way. And all I have to do is tell you to do it this way. But a lot of times we forget that, it's usually nobody wakes up and goes to work today and says, I want to be bad at this, or, I don't care. And so let's, assume that the mindset usually is not always the problem. There might be some ways of thinking about the world that are holding people back or making people not connect or making people have a hard time. Especially I see this with people managers. They've got some mindsets about what makes a good people manager that is not working for the people that they're managing. And so they might need to examine that. But so often we can, I think we try to solve a mindset. We try to solve a skill problem by just telling people that they should care.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. I think it was an education piece that I saw once. So it may be part of a broader theory, but really what you said really reminded me of, it was an article by a woman called Elena Aguilar. And I think it was called Mind the Gap, which appeals because it's like a British Tube reference. But it was really it was presented as part of some coaching training that I was doing a few years ago. And it's a really useful frame, just so again, for listeners listening, just like in a way, the crucial coaching always happens at the gap, right? Like if there's no gap for somebody, then they've already done the thing they want to do, or the thing their manager wants them to do, or whatever it is that brings them to coaching in the first place. They've already done it, right? There must be a gap. So one of the tasks is to find that gap and work out what it is. Mm-hmm. And exactly like you say, misdiagnosing the gap does make a lot of difference. And I might have said this on the show before, but I'll say it again just in case people haven't heard it. There's an Argentinian author called Fred Kaufman, and he has this rather cheeky, I sometimes have to preface it when I'm talking to clients by saying, this sounds cheeky, but I'm going to have to ask it because it's really important. It's like, why haven't you done it already? This thing that you want, because it often then we start to get, what's the gap? So really interesting. We could talk about that for ages, Stephanie. But
I'm so glad you reminded me that was Elena Aguilar that wrote the. Yeah,
did you know that as well?
But
that's her thing, is it?
Yeah, it was the way.
We'll put a link to this article in the.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's the way that Teach for America used to teach us to coach was cool. With that framework. So yeah. Very
cool. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. It's a really cool article. So we could talk about this loads more for sure. But I want to talk a bit more about what it's like to work at GiveDirectly for a whole bunch of reasons. But before we do that, I pulled this thing out. I just think it's worth saying, I think Stephanie slightly undersold the scale of the job that she was doing before she moved to GiveDirectly. Like one of the things that is in your bio, again, we'll put the bio in the show notes, people can read it. But you led a team which recruited 5,000 teachers a year in New York City. Is that right?
Yes, that's true.
That gives you, because again, people who haven't been to New York, even if you have, it's hard to get a sense of the scale of that place. But it is a huge place, right? With a lot of people in it. And 5,000 teachers a year. That is a serious piece of work.
And it's a volume. In a lot of ways, it was a volume game, but in more ways, it was working to try to find folks who would be willing to go to some of the hardest to staff schools, and they were hardest to staff for a reason, or figuring out solutions when the supply didn't meet the demand. So we would always need more bilingual teachers than we had available. Bilingual in specific languages and at a certain point with specific content knowledge and ability to teach. And at a certain point, we ran out of physical education teachers, and we needed to come up with a program to rapidly prepare more physical education teachers. And it was just infinite numbers of problems to solve in that role, and it was really cool. And then I got the joy of coming to GiveDirectly and becoming their first head of people.
And that was about 5 years ago, I think you said, right? So you got kind of 4 or 5 years of in there now. And there's loads of avenues we could take, but maybe I'm going to kind of, you guide us. Like, I guess that the pieces that are at the top for me, you've already said that the values of GiveDirectly are really important to the organization. I guess I've always kind of felt that from the outside, but I've got no idea what that means as you rapidly scale. And as the number of people and the incredible distribution around the world of those staff, like these kind of 21st century problems.
Right.
So I'm very curious about that, about how does recipients first show up? And I guess how that then rolls out into the bits of that you do that, in some ways are probably the bits of the organization that lots of the listeners are most curious about, because many of us are people who are really interested in people and how you support and encourage them. So that's, again, a really open thing. Like, what comes up? Where's the place for us to go?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, we could start with the values, because the values are, I remember when I interviewed for the job in my very first interview, and this happens a lot with other candidates too. I was like, yeah, you guys have these values, but do you really live by them? Because a lot of organizations have values, and they wind up...
basically all of them do, right?
All of them
and yet
do.
not all of them are good places to work or do responsible things in the world.
Right. And the thing I really struck me when I was applying to the job and in interviewing was that the values are intentionally crafted to be in tension with one another. Many of them. Sorry,
let me just catch this. Sorry to interrupt, Stephanie, but do you know, maybe now's the right time, or maybe in a few minutes, where GiveDirectly's values come from, and what, for example, already I can feel, and I know a little bit about this, that they're interesting and they land and they work. So I'm curious a little about why that is, if that makes sense, or how that is.
Yeah. I was not around when the values were crafted. So they've been around for quite a few years. From what I've heard, there was an earlier iteration, an earlier version. And then there was an infamous retreat where leaders of the team got together and they battled it out over some of the things that they believed were working and not working about the older version. And the founders of the organization were there, and some of the leaders of the organization were there from all the different places that we were working in at the time. And they came out with these, and they've been just we've lived with them now for quite some time, and I think they're great. I don't think there's much to change it. I love them. I may be biased, but I'll tell you a little bit about them. So we start with recipients first and team next, and so I think intentionally thinking about what that means, recipients first and team next. We think about recipients first. We think about, we're not in the business of exploiting recipients. And we want to make sure that everything we do is ensuring that the representation that we put of them is authentic. It is not in any way demeaning. It is not in any way exploitative. We want to, there are charities that will show you photos of recipients that will tug at your heartstrings. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to show you the joy and the empowerment and the resilience and the beauty that our recipients are bringing. And also we're sitting in a position where there are donors and there are recipients, and donors are often, there's a big power dynamic there. Donors have a lot of power in the situation. Oftentimes donors will come and they'll say, we want to do cash, but we don't want it to be unconditional. We want it to be conditional on people have to go to this training, or they have to spend it on food or this. And it's tempting sometimes because people have needs, and you're like, if we can eke out some of that's cash for people, great. But we, are very firm and okay to walk away from a donor if we don't feel like the donor is going to be recipients first and is going to stand by the unconditional cash. And we also, it also plays into how we design programs. So we actually ask recipients sometimes, we would like to, we'd like to work with you in your community. The plan is to give everybody in this community a certain amount of cash. Would you prefer to get all that cash at once? Would you prefer to get that cash in multiple sort of tranches? Let's work together. Let's partner. How would you want this to work? Would you prefer that it go to the female of the household or the male of the household? That we can't, of course, once we design the program, it's not like everybody gets exactly what they want every time, but, sometimes things surprise us. So people will say, I'd actually prefer to get a little bit of the money first so I can take care of some of my basic needs and think about what I'm going to do with the next set of money. And so if we're going to give, say, $1,000 to a recipient, they would prefer to get 300 and then another set and maybe another set in a lot of cases, which would be surprising. A lot of times you would think folks would want all the money at once. And then we think about Team Next. And a lot of times, if you think about being in a people person's role, the tension between those becomes even more acute. And I say that because people are resources. It takes money to hire people. It takes money to grow people. It takes money to make people feel like they're being valued by the organization. And we want our people to be optimally engaged and feel like they're taken care of in this organization. But that can easily go too far. It's at tension sometimes with the recipients first. More resources we're spending on our internal talent. The trade-off is that's fewer resources that are going to our recipients. But we don't normally see it that way because we see that, when we hire great talent and we retain them, and most of our people are here, will tell you, this is like the dream job because you get to do really cool work, solve really challenging problems, and be surrounded by really amazing people who are going to push you and make you a better person. And so I think they don't have to be at odds with one another. We think we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. I think we want to make sure that we're spending money and spending resources to attract and retain really great talent, and that we're never putting our team at risk to do what we want to do. I think there's a myth sometimes that to work in nonprofit, you have to be a martyr. We're not trying to be martyrs at GiveDirectly. We are trying to just do really good work. And that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice yourself and your ambition. It's not ambition for ambition's sake. It's ambition for the ability to do more good. But we have really ambitious team members who have big career goals, and they want to grow, and they want to learn, and so we can do all those things. The next we have proactively candid is our next value, which I love. And I mean, this shows up in externally, and I think Robbie, you mentioned that's one of the things that you appreciate. We're pretty candid with our donors and with the general public. A lot of this stuff we're learning, and sometimes the programs don't have exactly the impact that we anticipated them having. Sometimes they have a different impact. Sometimes we make mistakes. We have a blog where we will sometimes talk about how our thinking has evolved on topics like efficiency and topics like safeguarding and recipient and risk. But it also really shows up in how we engage with one another on a day-to-day. So, and I think, takes a lot of courage to be candid. But when we think about what that means for managers, and how we encourage them to make space where people feel safe being candid, and how we, of course, we've talked about the matrix of steering away from being ruinously empathetic and really, using feedback as a way to say the thing. Like and I think it also helps keep us from getting into groupthink, which can also be a big danger as an organization. If you're in a conversation and somebody says something with enough conviction, everybody's sort of like, is it okay for me to say I don't think this makes sense? And it's always okay in this organization. People challenge openly, and everybody from, an associate will challenge the CEO in a town hall and say, hey, I'm not sure this makes sense. Tell me more. What's the thinking? And that's okay. Oh gosh, I could go on forever. I don't want to do that.
I tell you what. Yeah, I know. Like, I tell you what, we definitely could, and I could listen forever. But because of time, give us how many are there? Give us the rest of them. Just tell us what they are, and then I've got a couple of I guess my temptation is to dive into each one, but maybe the more interesting thing for us to do is to think broadly. Right. But I think we need to hear the others first. Yep. So, recipient first, team next. Proactively candid, such a good value.
Create positive energy. Think rigorously and act quickly. Know yourself and grow. That's a good one for the coach audience.
Yeah.
Accept reality and propose solutions. And the final one is be productively ambitious.
Yeah, wow. And I mean, look, from the outside, it does that does resonate with me. Of my experience of the organization, like all of them. I think as you said them, I was like, I mean, some of them are easier for me to see than others, but that does resonate. So, let me see. There might be things that I have to say about those first two because you gave such interesting answers. No, I don't think so. Let's hold it. Let's hold it a bit higher than that. So, I guess what I'm curious about is, on the high level, or maybe let's go to this. So that like I say, like I can see them, and you've just given a set of examples of how this works. So it's one thing to say proactively candid. It's another to create an environment where the associate can say to the CEO in a town hall, this doesn't make sense. From what you've seen over the last 5 years, like what is it that has enabled GiveDirectly to, as far as you can see by the sound of it, actually create those situations?
A few things. I think it's usually, and we're not perfect. Of course, it's an organization that's made up of humans, and humans are flawed. But I think we try to be a really low ego organization. And by that I mean, when we're presenting something, the burden of proof is high. You've got to sort of look at the data. You've got to share the principles and assumptions that you're operating off of to arrive at the conclusion that you got to. And, and then at that point, once you've done that thinking, I think it depersonalizes and de-egos it a little bit, right? Because now we're talking about an idea that has been rigorously sort of thought through. And we can sort of break down, if you disagree, where's the breakdown? Are you disagreeing with the principle? Are you disagreeing with some of the assumptions that I made? Are you disagreeing with my interpretation of the data? And if we're disagreeing on the assumptions, okay, great. Let's dig in a little bit around that. So I think because we've built that sort of muscle, usually, that it's the sort of productive conflict there becomes a bit more depersonalized. And I think, of course, the power dynamics are always terrifying in an organization. We're not immune to that. And so, there are avenues where people can share feedback if they think something, if they're not quite sure, that they're afraid to say it. And, we wouldn't want everybody sort of like in the middle of town hall being like, what are you talking about? so, but they do sometimes, well, in the chat box, you'll see like, that doesn't sound right to me. Can you say more? And we'll also have a Slido going where people can like type in their questions there and ask for more information. And so I think, none of the leaders go into a conversation assuming that everybody's just going to accept what they say on face value and we're going to move forward. There's a little bit more rigor and, I guess, intellectualism on it than this is my gut and we're going to go this way. And I think that helps open up the culture to making people understand how we arrive at things. We don't arrive at things because somebody just said so. And that enables folks to be candid when things don't sound right to them, don't pass their rigorous test.
Yeah. I'm hearing the kind of, there's so much in there. I'm hearing the impact of, maybe it's that value around think rigorously and act quickly, or on the other ones, but that thing we were talking about before about the kind of center place of research, which helps take the ego out of it. But also, and just, humans are so fascinating, aren't they? Of course, some of it is self-fulfilling. Like once you have an environment where you see some people doing that and that it's okay, and that mostly, I mean, people are people. So I'm sure they sometimes get upset about, things not happening and that kind of thing. But as soon as you see, it's just culture is just such a fascinating aspect, in an organization or a family or a country, right? How does it happen and what is it? But I can really hear that. I'm curious, some of this is probably in there, because we haven't talked that much about the work, your work in the people part of the organization. I'm curious with these values, but, and again, you've talked about a bit about the tension, right? About, recipient first, team next. Well, that means team second. And what do you do about that? And how do you kind of manage that? And how do you try and keep that efficiency, of the money going to the recipients when you've got to pay people? Because if you don't pay people, they're not there and there's nothing to do. So it's not a simple thing. I guess at a high level, how do you and your team think about how to support the work and the values of the organization? And maybe particularly, I guess the follow-up, if I asked one, would probably be about the learning part and the development and growth of people. Because, of course, that's what I happen to be particularly interested in. So again, how do you think about that, the work that your function does to support the values and keep it going and the work of the organization?
Yep. Well, I will say there are things that we do that we try to do in a scalable way. There's only so much you can do as a small sort of global people team that's scalable to a 750 to 900 person organization across.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying, isn't it? 12 countries, but also, and like fields, staff in the field a lot, in the countries where the recipients are, which a lot of which is in Africa, so it's quite a challenge. Plus, presumably staff in quite a lot of staff in the US still, and, all that kind of thing. And I think you're based in Italy, right? So it's a really interesting mix. So small team, being efficient, has to be scalable.
Yeah, has to be scalable. So, in the beginning, a lot of what we see our role as for that scalable work is setting up some of the frameworks and the structures and the systems that we need to make things work. So, for example, when I first arrived, we didn't have a competency matrix or framework. And so when people were talking about what made somebody successful at GiveDirectly, it felt like hard to wrap your head around the patterns that you were seeing. And so, folks would sort of say, well, I noticed that this type of people tends to grow really fast. And if I could just figure out what it is that they have, then I could grow too. And so we spent a little bit of time just pulling people together from across all the different countries. Again, it's really hard when you're working with different cultures and sometimes different languages. Words that we use may not mean the same to everybody. And so it's important when you're building those kinds of frameworks to have inputs from people from all over. And so we started with the question, what are the most successful people? Who are the most successful people that you see at this organization? What do you think makes them successful? When you have felt most successful in your role, what have you been doing? And from there, series of conversations and inputs, we crafted together with this small little group of representatives, a competency framework that we can then point to. So we're using shared language of, what does it mean when we say emotionally intelligent leadership? What does it mean when we say problem solving? Similarly, we put together a leveling framework. So it was very clear, when you're at this level, this is what you're doing. When you're at that level, this is what you should be doing, what's expected of you. And it sounds very rudimentary, but I think it helps on the growth and allowing people on learning and development, because then you've got a shared language. And then we put in place feedback frameworks. So how often are we giving feedback? What's the platform that we're using? How are we holding people accountable to getting that feedback? It used to be annual reviews. We said, look, annual reviews are a look back. In order to really be impactful, it should be a continuous conversation between manager and managee. How can we set up the system to make it feel more like it's a continuous conversation without adding too much bulk? Managers would tell me, it's too much work right now. We're working on it. But we defaulted to it is a lot of work. You're a manager of people, and that is work. It's not just doing the same thing that you've been doing at a different level and delegating. It's actually working to coach and develop other people. So that's what we started to do. We also started to look at things that were core skills that were holding people back from growth, especially, folks who had less exposure outside of their home country. We found that, there were communication. There's a sort of communication style that works better with donors, that works better with external audiences, that even works better in internally. And we want to try to demystify that. So we get our comms experts in the room, and we would have them. Tyler has done some really incredible comms workshops for folks. And we found that at a certain level, folks were really struggling, between a manager and a senior manager level. We expect a certain amount of hard skills in Excel, for example. And so trying to backwards plan using the teaching experience, what's the Excel skills that you really need to excel to be good at this level? And then let's get the best people at this tool to come together and design and deliver a training that we can record, and then people can self work through. Again, because a lot of our folks are out in the field. They're really interested in learning, but they're spending 7-8 hours a day going out into communities and enrolling recipients. And so when they want to invest in their learning and development, it may not be the right time for them to join a live training. So those are some of the scalable things. And then we have a whole different thing that we do with managers of people. So there's an intro to management that's talking both about some of the mindsets. So we talk a little bit about how your time allocations and values should shift when you go from an individual contributor to being a manager. We use a lot from the Leadership Pipeline, the book, The Leadership Pipeline, that kind of lays that out. And then we talk about, how to be self-aware, how to build your own self-awareness. Why is that important? You will have blind spots, and nothing will reveal your blind spots faster than managing a team of people. You will have biases. What are those biases, and how do you interrupt them? And so we've done those trainings. Sometimes we deliver those trainings. Like I was in Liberia late last year doing that training for a group of Liberian people managers. Sometimes we do them in little pieces we'll do little slivers of a training, bite sizes of a training. Sometimes we record them and make them available for people to see at their own. And then, and then sometimes every now and again, we get folks who need a more in-depth support. And so that could look like, sometimes it comes from folks, myself or somebody on my team, if it depending on what the situation is. Sometimes we encourage them to get an executive coach, and we will give them some parameters of what they can look for, help connect them with people who will help accelerate their growth. And then we do have a couple of people who are internally have explored getting their own coaching certificate. And we're trying to think about how to internally build some small coaching programs for emerging leaders or for folks who we think might benefit from that. So it's a mix. We do a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in there somewhere, I think about the competency framework. You said it sounds rudimentary. And one of the things that caught me is about, that, but also a lot of the things you've said is that, kind of values sounds rudimentary, but it's one thing to have that thing. And it's another thing to make it in such a way that it works for the context of the organization that you're in and then actually use it. And I think one of the things that stands out from the way you're talking, it's in those values in some ways, right? It's like accepting reality, and like, well, what can we actually do right now? Yeah, look, Stephanie, like I could ask you 10 questions about all the things you've just said, but we're coming towards the end of our time. Yeah. I guess, is there anything else you'd like to say about that we haven't covered that you really want to touch on? And I guess within there might be, particularly, are there any other ways to support GiveDirectly that we haven't talked about so far?
Well, I imagine that there might be folks in your audience that either themselves or people that they have worked with or coached might be interested in working at GiveDirectly. And so they might want to learn about that. You think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was just thinking before, it's like, oh, it reminds me, like, what a cool organization, and what can I, we could talk about that offline, but I'm sure there will be. It reminds me though, like, obviously in brief, because we haven't got much time left. Why is the organization growing so much? Like I didn't actually ask that question. I just said, for example, we had a 75% headcount growth. I guess if there may well be people and a way to support the organization, whether it's somebody listening, getting excited to work for GiveDirectly or just wanting to support and knowing that there's this growth going on. So why is it growing? And where should people go? And but also like what kinds of roles are growing in the organization?
Yeah, good question. So the 75% was a particular point in time around 2021, 2022. So it's a little outdated. But we did grow very fast in that period of time. And a lot of that was because cash, unconditional cash, became more of an interesting conversation. And people were talking about it more around COVID. If people are not able to work because of pandemic restrictions, et cetera, how do we make sure that they have their basic needs met? And a lot of people started looking at cash as a way to do that. And so that did lead to a surge of interest from donors. That meant that we could do more good. We could move into more difficult areas, regions, communities, and expand. The growth of the organization has been stable now for a couple of years, and as we start to sort of think about what we need, it's we're thinking about how to build. We went through that. Anytime an organization goes through that rapid growth, you really start to stretch the systems and technology that they're using, and so we kind of reached that point where we're like, ooh, wow, this is we've built a really good organization, but we could update some of the tech that we're using, some of our operating procedures, et cetera. And so some of the things that we're looking for are in the tech space. We're always looking for great engineering talent, and some. Recently, we have started thinking about the tech and the programmatic products that we offer, and how we're sort of making it so that those can be more scalable. And so we've got a fledgling product team that we're starting to put together that's combining our tech and research and really thinking about how are we putting the different types of programming that we can run together with the types of programming that donors are most interested in and that we see can be the most impactful all together. So it's a really cool new team that we're spinning up. We've got finance. We're always looking for great finance folks. I think we just hired a few really spectacular folks I'm really excited about. So there are opportunities. We've got everything from country directors that on the program side that we're searching for. But yeah, I would say that's a little bit of the growth story. We're not in a rapid, if you go to our website, you can look at our careers page and you'll see some really interesting roles, but there won't be, hundreds of them right now.
We'll put a link to that. And I've just remembered also there's a great how to help page on the website, which has suggestions of ways to support the organization. So we can put a link to that as well. But is there anything else, Stephanie, that we haven't talked about that you'd want to share with the listeners before we wrap up?
Oh, yeah. I don't think so. I mean, I do think, I think that a lot of times the folks feel like, I've actually heard candidates say this, people say this before when they're thinking about their jobs and careers. And they'll say, oh, well, I'm still, I think they have this mindset that you go and work at a nonprofit to slow down. I don't know where that comes from, but people kind of feel like, oh, I'm going to go and make money and make a career. And then when I'm ready to sort of ease my way out, I'm going to go work for a nonprofit. And that's not the culture at GiveDirectly. I hope that's clear by everything we've talked about so far. I mean, it is really, it's really a place where people can build a career and, like I said, solve really cool problems, surrounded by really interesting people. And I hope that, if anybody here is a coach and is talking to people about their career path and what's motivating them, I think a lot of people are craving a job that feels like you're doing more than putting money in rich people's pockets, or it has some sort of meaning or mission. And it's a really unique opportunity that I think we have at GiveDirectly to be able to wake up in the morning, feel like you're doing good in the world, in a job that keeps you intellectually stimulated, that is rigorous, and yeah, it's this sort of perfect nexus between ambition and doing good in the world, and those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. You get ambition with purpose, and so I would just encourage people to think about it. Think about a career at GiveDirectly and think about encouraging that to your clients. And if you are a coach who is looking for a chance to do some good with your coaching skills, sometimes we are looking for coaches for our team members. So lots of opportunities to support the work that are outside of money. But we like the money too.
Yeah, but also, like, as we talked about in the first part of the call, a small amount of money to us in a country like the UK or the US or Italy goes a long way in other places. So definitely think about that too. And just to catch it, it does the feel like one of the things that I think is more true is that you often do get more in the private sector than in the not-for-profit sector is the kind of dynamism and ambition. It's not completely true, but it's like the dynamism of GiveDirectly. It feels like from the outside, it feels like a startup, that kind of startup.
Right.
I mean, obviously it's not really a startup anymore. It's been around a while, but it has that feel, which with that plus the mission is, I can imagine it's quite a good proposition, good nexus, like you said. Look, Stephanie, like I said, we could go on for ages about this, about all the things, and there are many more things I could have double clicked on and questions that I had down that I didn't ask. So that's the way of these conversations. But thank you so much for your time and energy. It's been such a pleasure. We'll do everything we can to encourage people to give and support the organization. But thanks to you and all the team for all the work you're doing. It's really important work.
Thank you, Robbie. Again, thanks for your commitment to the organ over the years and to our recipients. And nice to meet your audience, and really hope that they found something compelling in here.
Thanks so much, Stephanie.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Robbie here again. And just a few quick things to share with you before you go on to the rest of your day. Thanks for getting all the way to the end of this episode. I'm imagining that means that you found the conversation compelling. And so I want to ask something of you. Please make a donation to GiveDirectly. As Stephanie and I discussed, a donation of just £10 or $12 could double the income of one of the poorest people in the world for almost a week. Just think about what a difference that could make to someone. And making a regular donation of £20 a month or whatever you can afford could have a transformational impact on many people's lives. empowering and trusting them to create the life they want in the way they want to do it. There are links to make donations in the show notes wherever you're listening, or you can simply Google GiveDirectly, all one word. Of course, there are also ways to support this show, but it feels a little funny to mention that today when set against the backdrop of GiveDirectly's work. But just as GiveDirectly is grateful to all the people who have supported their work over the years, so am I to the people who have supported the Coach's Journey. In particular today, thank you to Alex O'Neill, Alex Whitten, Alan Bedding, Alison Malone, David Norris, Jessica Jem, Linda Ransom, Lucy Braun, Michael Trugman, Paul Bellow, and Nikki Scrivener for your ongoing support. Thank you too for listening, and we hope to have you back with us on the Coach's Journey podcast sometime soon.